Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lee Brown. Today we're taking a look at a practical strategy or rule, we could call it, that is going to help with effective and healthy communication, particularly in a marital context. But it could also be seen as applicable in other contexts as well. I'm excited to discuss this with you because I've seen it be very, very effective in my personal life, and my prayer is that it will be valuable to you as well. Now, it's no surprise that unhealthy communication skills, I should say, or the lack of communication in general, is a leading contributor, if not the leading contributor, perhaps, to marital tension, stress, and marriage breakdown. However, communication, there's many different facets and angles we could focus on with communication. But there's one particular scenario that I hear over and over and over and over again from couples who are struggling with their connection in marriage, with the ability to communicate well. And inevitably, both spouses are doing it to each other, but one spouse is usually feeling the effects a little bit stronger. And that's the one that oftentimes raises their hand and says, look, if we don't figure this out, I don't like where we're headed, because every time we try to communicate, or every time I try to bring up something that needs to be addressed, this same pattern happens over and over again. And I hear this so often. I've seen it so often in my own marriage. And so there's a particular rule or strategy that I find to be incredibly helpful for this. And here's the scenario. Let me kind of draw this out just a little bit. All right, so you have one spouse here who, the first spouse, sorry, my pen decided to cut off on me. You have one spouse who is frustrated at something. They are disgruntled, whatever it is. They've been hurt by the other spouse, and they need to communicate this to the other spouse. This is how marriages are designed to function. Marriages will collapse if we don't have communication about tender topics, or topics that could be fragile or stressful. We have to cross those bridges in marriage. One spouse has to be able to say to the other spouse, when this happened, when you did this, when you did that, it hurt me. Those are very tough conversations to have. Or they need to be able to voice concerns without the other spouse getting offended, getting defensive, and turning the tables, okay? Inevitably, this is how the cycle goes. Spouse A is disgruntled, hurt, upset at something, and the only way the marriage is going to be healthy and successful is if that's communicated, because we all know if spouse A kind of buries that over time, that's going to swell up and eventually explode, and it doesn't lead to anywhere good. So a healthy marriage is able to have these tough conversations, and they lead to healthier, stronger, better, more fruitful places. However, what ends up happening in most marriages that are struggling to communicate and are somewhat operating with unhelpful communication skills is person A will attempt to communicate to spouse B. Spouse B is minding their own business, right? Has no idea what's going on, that spouse A is upset or any of this stuff. And so spouse A is like, hey, can we talk? And spouse B is like, yeah, I guess, what's wrong? Because you don't ask to talk unless something's wrong, right? And so they're already kind of put in a defensive mode. And here's what happens is spouse A kind of begins to communicate to spouse B the areas that they were hurt. And spouse B begins to offer explanations, defend themselves, say why they were misunderstood or this, that, or the other. And what ends up happening is the tables usually end up getting turned. So where spouse A initiated the conversation, it ends up being spouse B telling spouse A why they were wrong and why they hurt spouse B. And now spouse B feels unheard. And then spouse A feels unheard. And spouse A will then just shut down. All right, they'll just stop talking completely altogether. and they leave feeling unheard. They leave feeling unfelt, unseen, and hopeless because they're like, my spouse is just going to continue repeating the same behaviors or patterns that are frustrating me, are hurting me, stressing me out, whatever, because they're not hearing me. And I have no hope or indication that there's going to be positive change. So what happens next time? Spouse A actually begins to build like this wall, slowly over time, brick by brick, we start to kind of build a wall over time. And what this wall actually is spouse A's attempt to protect themselves because spouse B is repeating the same patterns that were hurtful or frustrating or whatever. And every time spouse A tries to talk about it, we have the same cycle that happens where spouse B kind of turns the tables, spouse A leaves feeling unheard and hopeless. So eventually spouse A stops talking altogether and stops initiating conversations pretty much altogether, and they start to kind of live this private life over here in their inner world, kind of just bearing the weight of hopelessness, frustration. They start to maybe distance themselves to try to protect themselves from spouse B, doing whatever it is that was hurting them or frustrating them. And they begin to believe that anytime I try to talk to spouse B, it's going to lead to more conflict, into more pain, into more frustration or a fight. And it's better to just not talk and just to kind of deal with it and bury it. But in order to do that, they start to build this wall as a defense mechanism against the pain they were feeling to kind of try to protect themselves because they don't believe their spouse is going to protect them or hear them. And so what we want to do is we want to put a rule in place that I call he who initiates is he who is heard. So we have spouse A. They are kind of disgruntled, and we got spouse B who, did something and has maybe a pattern of behaviors that's harmful, hurtful. Who knows? I mean, it could be a myriad of things. Spouse A is stressed, there's conflict in the marriage, and they need to address it and talk about it. So spouse A, they initiate the conversation. So he who initiates, the rule is he who initiates is he who is heard. So what does this mean? This means spouse B has one goal, to hear and understand. Okay? What they are not going to do is offer an explanation. For instance, spouse A says, when you did X, Y, and Z, here's how it made me feel. Spouse B is not going to say, I am so sorry you feel that way. I really did not intend that. Here's why I did that. Let me help you understand my side of things. Let me help you understand my perspective. Let me help you understand why I didn't mean it and those weren't my intentions. Spouse B is not going to offer. Here's what we tend to do. We tend to offer two things: excuses or explanations. Okay? And what spouse B is doing is trying, it comes from a good place sometimes, where spouse B is trying to tell spouse A, look, I am so sorry you felt that way and that I did that to you, but here were my intentions. And there's a belief that if spouse B could help spouse A see their side of things, spouse A would feel better. A lot of times that's where it comes from. But sometimes spouse B that won't even have that generous of an approach. And instead, the way it'll go is a lot more explosive, a little bit more hostile. So spouse A says, hey, when you said this or did this, it really frustrated me and hurt me. And spouse B says, well, I did that because you did this and because you did that. And when you do that, it puts me in this type of position, or it makes me feel this type of way. And so I have to respond that way. And I have to say this, or I have to say that. And so what just happened there is what I called a turning of the tables, meaning spouse A comes and tries to communicate why they're upset, why they're hurt, to be heard and understand and felt. But spouse B sort of, again, who knows the intentions? Usually the intentions are pure, but for whatever reason, in self-defense, spouse B turns the table and starts trying to offer an explanation for why they did whatever they did that hurt spouse A. But usually why they did what they did is an accusation. It now... we're playing tennis here with accusations, because now spouse B is saying, well, you hurt me when I did that. And spouse A argues back, well, you hurt me by doing this. And when you did this, blah, blah, blah. And so we just have this tennis match that is getting more and more emotional and stressful with each exchange, okay? And we go nowhere helpful. That never ends in a good place. Never, okay? At least in my experience. It may be different for you. But here's what we want to try to do. Spouse A initiates, so spouse A is heard, okay? He who initiates is he who is heard. So spouse A says, I feel like this, that, and the other thing, you hurt me. I feel like you don't listen. I feel like you don't hear. And spouse B may completely disagree. Spouse B may feel like you completely don't understand me. You are completely misinterpreting things. You completely don't understand my side of things. And what spouse B is going to do for now is do everything they can to put a pin in those thoughts, emotions, and that drive that wants to kind of defend yourself. And instead, what you're going to do is you're actually going to just listen. You're just going to listen, okay? Why? That was supposed to be a highlighter. Sorry. Listen. Why? Because the objective here is to hear and understand your spouse, okay? Spouse A, if you're going to initiate, whoever's initiating, it's very important that you do so without using accusatory language if you want this to be successful. So whatever we can do to not put spouse B on the defensive from the jump is probably going to be more helpful to us. Okay, so spouse A, whoever's initiating, you want to use non-accusatory language. You did this. You always do that. When you do this, or you always do that, okay? What you want to approach with is, babe, can we talk about something that's really been weighing on me, hurting me? I know your intentions are pure, and I don't think you intend to do X, Y, and Z by any means. However, when you do this, or when this happens, here's how I feel. And because I feel this way, I see patterns beginning to develop in me, such as when you don't listen, when I try to communicate and you just fight back, I notice that I start to build a wall, and I don't want to build a wall. And I just want you to know I don't feel heard when I talk to you. And now that's going to be incredibly hard for spouse B to hear. Everything in them is going to want to push back and defend. And because spouse B probably has pure intentions, spouse B probably does do a lot of things right. And spouse B probably didn't intend to do anything they're now being accused of doing. And so this is why we want to avoid accusatory verbiage and language and kind of point things back to us. I feel this way. And we don't want to point the finger so much with our vocabulary. You did this, you did that, so on and so forth. And that can go a long way in helping the spouse who is listening to hear and reflect without growing defensive. However, there's probably always going to be something in the spouse who is listening that is going to want to defend themselves. But again, the goal is to try everything in our power to simply hear and understand. Hear and understand. Sorry, my handwriting's so bad. Hear and understand. So here's how the conversation should end. Spouse A says, hey, when you did X, Y, and Z, here's how it made me feel. I feel unheard. I feel unseen. I feel rejected. I feel like you value your friends over me. I feel this, that, and the other. Spouse B, the hearer here, takes note of everything they're feeling, right? Well, she doesn't understand this, she doesn't understand that, or he doesn't understand like my perspective, or he doesn't understand that I only did these things because he first hurt me, and we're going to put a pin in those things. I'm not saying throw them away or put them under the rug. I want to be clear about that. I'm saying put a pin in them, because guess what? There's going to come a time where you get to initiate the conversation and you're the one who's heard. Okay? But it's just not right now. This is not the time to do that. Okay? This is the time to simply hear and understand your spouse. Okay? So the conversation is going to end like this from spouse B. The reply is something to the effect of, truly showing that you put yourself in your spouse's shoes and can have just at least a fraction of an understanding of what they must have felt or encountered, or what it must have been like to be them in that moment. And you're going to communicate that to your spouse. So if your spouse says, listen, whenever we went and did this with some friends and you did X, Y, and Z, it made me feel like I was pushed out and you were maybe embarrassed to be around me, or you just wanted to be with your friends. Spouse B's response is not, are you kidding me? Here's my perspective. I wasn't trying to do that, yada, 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 and a bunch of defense mode. No, spouse B is not, well, I only did that because you first were on your phone the whole time. That's not the right response, even though, there's valid talking points there that we have to explore, but not now. All right? This is and there's appropriate times and places. Instead, spouse B's response is, wow, I'm so sorry that I made you feel that way. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes now and really understand what it must have felt like to feel like your spouse valued their friends over you, or to feel like your spouse was embarrassed of you. And if that were to happen to me and I put myself in those shoes, I would feel really bad. It would hurt. And I'm so sorry that I caused you to feel that way. Please forgive me. Will you forgive me? And I'm going to try to be much more aware of that moving forward, that these scenarios and these situations may cause you to feel this type of way. I had no idea. I was completely unaware, and I'm so sorry. I will move forward with awareness, and I will consider you and how my actions and things affect you, because I'm so sorry you felt unseen. I'm so sorry you felt like I was embarrassed of you. I'm so sorry you felt like I don't listen to you or I don't hear you. And if I were to be on the other end of that, it would really hurt. It would really stink. And if I'm causing you to have that experience, that bothers me. And I'm sorry. And then we end this conversation by spouse B saying or asking, will you forgive me? And have I made you feel heard and understood? Or is there more that you would like to express? And then spouse A typically will feel seen and felt and heard. So spouse B, your goal is to hear and understand, and to make your spouse who is initiating a tough conversation, to make them feel seen and heard. Your goal is not to cause them to understand why you did what you did. It's not to explain your actions or intentions and to prove that you didn't mean to hurt them, or that you didn't mean that's not the point of this, and that's not going to be helpful. And it's certainly not to help them see that your actions were just a response to their actions. Okay? There is a time and a place to navigate these things. But this is when your spouse initiates a conversation like this, that is not the time or the place. There are some instances where you need to be in counseling. You need to have a mediator and a third party. Some conversations you should just not try to navigate without a third party counselor, mediator present to help navigate the conversation. All right? So if that's the case and necessary for you, please don't try to have conversations that you need to do in counseling. Go have a counselor help you with those conversations, right? So if you feel like, well, I'm having a really hard time just hearing and understanding my spouse because they need to hear that the reason I did these things or do these things is because they're doing X, Y, and Z. Okay? So if you are like, I can't just put that on the table and initiate my own conversation in an hour or tomorrow, because you feel like if I respond to this, they're going to respond, and you just feel like you cannot navigate the conversation in a healthy way, this is where it really helps to have a counselor and a mediator to help navigate those conversations. But here's what happens, is all of those things that spouse B kind of just, put a pin in it, that list they're making in their head of, okay, here's the things that they do that hurt me or cause me to do the things that they don't like. I'm making a mental note of that. And that's probably something I need to have a conversation about. So at another time, after you have made spouse A feel heard and validated in their feelings, okay, guess what? Spouse B initiates a conversation with spouse A and says, hey, can we talk about something? Hey, remember the conversation you brought up? It reminded me of some areas that I am feeling hurt or stressed, and I would like to express those to you to see if you would hear me and understand me, and if we could progress towards a healthier state. When you were talking, it reminded me of some things that happen, some patterns I see that cause me stress or pain. And here's how I feel when X, Y, and Z happens, okay? And so guess what? Now the roles are reversed, okay? Spouse B initiated this conversation. So what is spouse A's goal? To hear and understand. That's it. That's the goal. That's the only goal you have, is to hear and understand. Not defend yourself, not point the finger back and try to explain that you are only doing this because they're doing that first. It's not to try and offer some sort of excuse. No, it's simply to hear and understand, repeat back to the spouse who initiated and is expressing their pain or stress what you're hearing. Don't try to fix it, okay? Just hear and understand, okay? So that's the goal, to hear and to understand. So I hope that this has been helpful. I want to look at 3 texts in Scripture that I think are very relevant and pertinent for this, okay? First is James 1:19. Everyone should be what? Quick to listen. This is what we are instructed on in God's Word, is to be quick to listen and slow to speak. Quick to listen and slow to speak, okay? Most of our marital conflict in these conversations when we're communicating and they just explode and they get out of hand and nothing is accomplished and we just both feel like we just sat here for an hour and a half and we got nowhere. It's because we're being way too quick to speak and way too slow to listen. And what I believe that this he who initiates is he who is heard rule or boundary does is it forces one of the spouses to slow down and be quick to listen and very slow to speak and follow biblical principles. And it allows the other spouse to feel heard and seen and validated, which is really all they wanted. They didn't want an explanation. They didn't want it to be fixed. They just wanted to be known, okay? Moving forward, Proverbs 18. So verse 13 says, to answer before listening, This is folly and shame. To answer before listening is folly and shame. Let that sink in and think, how many times do I do that in my marriage, in my workplace, with my kids, so on and so forth? How often do I actually stop to hear and understand? That's what the text is getting at when it says listen. Listen is referring to not just hearing, but it's understanding. It's being able to put yourself in that person's reality and feeling what they feel. That's listening. Okay, it's not just an audible thing, and so you shouldn't be answering or replying until you've put yourselves in the shoes of the other person and you have felt what they're feeling, the joy, the pain, the sadness, whatever it is. That's empathy. And you respond. The only way you can actually respond in compassion is to first have empathy. Empathy leads to compassion. So when you feel what that person must be feeling, you respond from compassion because you respond as though you were in that situation and how you would want to receive care, kindness, or a kind of response. To do opposite is folly and shame. And I think that is very evident where marriages end up when they do not listen and when they answer before listening. Marriages end up in very stressful, painful places because of the folly and the shame of answering before truly trying to hear and understand their spouse. Okay, finally, Proverbs 18:2. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinion. Isn't this what we do in our marriages? And this is precisely what the rule that I'm talking about, he who initiates is he who is heard, seeks to lead us into these biblical principles. All right? A fool, think about this, a fool finds no pleasure in understanding. How many times, if we're being honest, is that us in our own marriage, where we are truly not seeking to understand, but we're so adamant about we want to be heard. We want our side of the table to be expressed. We want our perspective to be known. We want to justify, we want to defend, we want to clear our name, we want to make sure they're not misinterpreting us or misunderstanding us or projecting what their father did to them onto us, and just like all of these different things. Fools have no pleasure in just being able to, I want to know and understand your perspective, because if you're hurting, I'm hurting, and I want to know that what you're feeling and experiencing, I want to understand. Fools don't take any pleasure in that. No, fools, they want to air their own opinions. They want to air their side of the story. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be known and felt. They want to be, understood and perceived as a just, competent, person who didn't do something wrong or have the wrong intentions, and so they are just, and that's okay. Like, there's a time and a place to express your side and express your heart and express your perspective. But first, you must prioritize. The Bible says to consider others as more important than yourself. And if anyone should fit that, it should be considering your spouse more important than yourself. So there's a time and a place for you to be heard and understood and felt as well by your spouse. But when they muster up the strength to initiate a conversation, the first goal and priority is to hear and to understand. And this is what the Word of God guides us and leads us into. And I believe if we'll follow it, we'll see the fruit of this in our marriages. And like I said, this could apply to more than just marriages, but this becomes very relevant in the marriage context. But perhaps this happens at work, and maybe you have partners or coworkers, and you can see where things are kind of going to get out of hand in conversations, or maybe you're experiencing these types of communication breakdowns with your children or with your parents, and so on and so forth. And so this same principle, he who initiates is he who is heard. If both people will commit to working on this or applying this strategy, I believe that it can add a lot of value and really help with effective, healthy communication that actually helps us have productive, fruitful conversations that helps us build and flourish in our relationships. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, let me know in the comments below, and share it with a friend who you think may benefit from it as well. But until next time, as always, God bless you guys.